started. As always, we have a vast group of experience, a vast experience in this group. So I always want to have these things be interactive. You all share ideas, as we're going through the process, because you all, are doing this stuff day in and day out, and so you're going to have some experiences along the way that are also going to be helpful and beneficial to the whole group. So today's topic is doing CMAs. So obviously we've heard a lot from you all that this is probably one of the things that you struggle with the most is doing a CMA. I'm going to be honest with you, when it comes to we're going to go through the Bright MLS doing a CMA. We're also going to go through NAR, RPRs doing a CMA. But before we get to that, and I'm going to tell you, you all use the stuff more than I do. So when we get on there, you may have some tips and tricks for me to go a little faster through the process. But before we get on there, I really wanted to talk about pricing and adjustments and all the things that you need to think about when you're doing a CMA. Because it's not just a matter of putting in the property and getting some comps. There's a whole lot more that goes into it. And if you don't have that exact comp, how do you make adjustments? And what are some ideas and some ways that we can talk about making adjustments? So what I have in your packet here, the very first part, I actually just went online and pulled this up, is some pricing adjustment guidelines. So this can kind of give you a little bit of an idea. Obviously the price difference in the house is a little bit different for what you're going to adjust for these particular things. So this can be a little bit of a guide for you all to use if you can't find that perfect comp. But we're going to talk about a lot of other ways as well for you to try to do adjustments or find adjustments, when you're comping out a property. So for example, let's actually, I'm going to go back through here before we get into the adjustments. Your other pages, this is actually taken from part of the PSA Pricing Strategy Advisor class. You all have, I know we gave the class here at the office a year or so ago, but we also have the class right on RE/MAX University. It's 6 hours, so we're not doing that today. We have an hour, and there's a lot to cover. But what I did do is bring part of the coursework out, the part that I think is important for pricing properties. And then when we actually sit down and go through a couple of CMAs, I have a couple properties that we're going to do some CMAs on, we're going to kind of go through these guidelines. So not only learning and trying to figure out how to make adjustments for certain things, but there's a whole laundry list of things that you need to make sure you're following through with when we're doing a CMA. So the number one goal is to have the property optimal similarity to the property. So if you're doing a townhouse in Whittier and you've got 5 comps, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, garage, townhome, they're all the same. Maybe you have a little bit of an upgrade of a kitchen or something like that, and you need to adjust for those things. That's a pretty easy comp to do, right? One of the comps that we're going to do today is a single-family rancher in Whittier. There are not very many of those in Whittier. So how do you figure that out? And how do we adjust? And what do we need to do to expand our area to kind of get the comps for that? And how do we get our comps to be as similar as we can by making adjustments? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Characteristics of the comparables is number 2. So, the date of the sale of the property is, how far back will appraisers usually go?
6 months.
6 months. They'll go a little bit further if you have a very unique property. Big farm or something like that, they may go a little further out. But that's what they're looking for is 6 months. And anything outside of that, then we got to start to worry a little bit. So when we go through our CMA, we're going to put 6 months in there. Location. And this is a big one. Obviously, location is huge. So, but it's not just the location of the property, you know, if you're doing a suburb, Spring Ridge or Whittier, one of those, it's also the location within the suburb, so, or within the community. So you may have your single-family home that backs up to the farm field, or you may have your single-family home that backs up to the street, the road. So how do you adjust for that? What do we do? The size, obviously, of the house makes a big deal. You're not going to comp a smaller rancher with a 7,000 square foot colonial. Amenities, pools, security fit systems, your floor plan style, so we'll be putting these things in. Age is also important. Number of bedrooms and baths, of course, is important. Your garage size, and you'll see on your appraisal adjustment guidelines, they do have, you know, depending on how expensive the house is, depends on how much you adjust for garage and garage size, right? So this can just kind of be a guideline for you. Improvements, of course, potential negatives, busy street, we talked about that. Date of sale, location. And now we're going to talk about how far out do we go. So if you look at the next page, which is 26 in your packet, it depends on, you know, what kind of community you're in. So the guidelines are for a suburban area, you're going to try to pick the same subdivision, if you can, to get the comp. Same school, or if schools are a force in your market, and we do know that in certain areas, absolutely, schools make a big deal. And that's a little tough because not everybody puts the schools in there, so that can be a little bit tougher. 1 mile and a 1 mile radius if possible. So we're going to find that in one of the ones we do today, you probably have to go a little bit further out than that 1 mile. If it's a city and it's a condo, you're only going to go half a mile radius if possible, because hopefully you've got comps that are similar. And then rural, we're going to do 5 miles. So that can kind of give you an idea. Micro markets. Who knows a micro market in Frederick?
Middletown.
Middletown? Historic district. That's what I was going to say. Downtown Frederick. Major micro market, because you can't, if you're just going to go around by a half a mile radius, right, and you're comping Church Street with Fifth Street, that's not a comp, right? It's way different.
Yeah.
So you really do need to know what those micro markets are. And if you're not sure, if you're in an area where you're not sure, I would say pick up the phone and call your appraiser, because they're going to help guide you through that as well. Or ask someone else in the office who does that market on a regular basis. So be sure you're paying attention to micro markets. Amenities, obviously, as well. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about is seller motivation, right? How often do, you know, there's too many times I think we go online, we do our comps, we can even send it over electronically to the seller and say, hey, you know, this is kind of what we're looking for in the price of your house. But what is their motivation? What if they really have to move quickly? So we also need to take that into consideration in the price. And the other thing that they didn't have on that list is condition, obviously. Condition is a big deal. And so everything that we can do, of course, to get them to have the home in that condition, in the best condition and staged, obviously helps their price as well. And this, I know I'm speaking to the choir, you guys know all this stuff. But what I hear from you the most is adjustments. How do we figure that out? So let's just say you have, say you're doing a townhouse in Glenbrook, right? And your comps, your subject property is on the golf course, but none of your comps are on the golf course. How do you find out what the difference is, what that adjustment should be for being on the golf course? Because obviously that's an amenity that some people think. Anybody want to throw out an idea? What would you do?
I would go back like a year or two, find other ones that were on the golf course and ones that were on the market at the same time that weren't, and see what the difference is in the prices that they went for.
Right. And one of the things that I always want to say is think about the percentage not just the amount.
Right.
Because you can also go out of the area. So say you, and not for your comp, but to figure out your adjustment. Say you really can't find, it's Whiskey Creek, and you just can't find, you know, the one that's on the golf course, and you're trying to figure out that adjustment. Well, there are other golf course communities, such as Fountainhead or Glenbrook, but the prices are very different, right? So somebody is going to pay a lot more money for a house in Whiskey Creek on the golf course than they would in Glenbrook, just because the price of the house is more. So what you can do is you're gonna go over to, maybe you go to Whiskey Creek and you find one that's on the golf course, and one that's off the golf course, or Fountainhead, and then you figure out the percentage. So how much more percentage-wise is somebody willing to pay for being on the golf course, right? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And you guys know how to do percentages? So just real quick, so say you've got a house that's, you know, $750 in Whiskey Creek, and you know on the golf course they paid $780. So you're gonna take your $30,000, and anybody wanted to have a calculator, you're gonna take your $30,000 and divide it by your $750, and that's gonna give you your percentage. So if somebody's willing to, and I haven't done the numbers, I'm just making these numbers up, but if somebody's willing to pay 8% more for a property on the golf course, that's a way you can now go back to your community and know that, you know, we have some other comparables and it's about 8% more that they would be willing to pay for the golf course. Does that make sense? To anybody? You guys confused?
Tell me that, I'm sorry, I know we've done this so many times, but we got 30,000 because of the difference.
Right.
We're dividing the 30,000 by which number?
By the 780.
780.
Yes.
That makes sense.
So if you take 30,000 divided by 780, you're gonna get a .04, whatever, I'm like I
Right,
said.
0.04.
0.04, so 4%. So you know, and if you pull up some other comparables in some other areas, you can have a pretty good idea that you can add a 4% increase for being on the golf course. Does that make sense to you guys? You guys are confused.
Yes.
That makes sense?
It does.
So, you know, that's just one more way to, you know, find your adjustments. Same thing with, a lot of times it's bathrooms. You know, what's the difference in the adjustment between, you know, a bathroom, the 3 full baths versus 2 baths, or 1.5 versus 3, and that's pretty easy to find. If you can't find it in your community, go to a similar community, you know, Whittier, Spring Ridge, North Crossing, Clover Ridge, any of those are going to be very similar, and hey, people were willing to pay. In that case, you may have more of a dollar amount because the properties or the communities are fairly same price-wise. People were willing to pay $8,000 more to have that 3rd full bath versus your half bath. Make sense? And what I would actually suggest you all do is you start to keep a list of these things so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and think about it every time. Hey, every time, you know, we've done I've done my market analysis, and the difference between 2 bathrooms and 3 bathrooms, 3 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms, it's either percentage based on other neighborhoods, or it's a specific price range based on similar neighborhoods. Any questions on that? So, questions on how do you know what neighborhoods are similar?
You drive through?
Because if you are new to an area, or, you know, new to a marketplace, how do you figure out which neighborhoods might be similar? Well, we know school district is a big deal, right, in certain areas. So you do at least want to try to find the school districts, find things that are in the school district. Prices, I mean, style of homes, you know, and builders, if you can go back and find the builder. Obviously, Osherman, Dries, Sean, you know all those those different builders and how all the different communities that are going to be very similar. Your Ryan communities are going to be very similar. So, you know, if you have to go outside of where you're comping, especially with newer homes, because sometimes you don't have a lot of resales yet. People have bought new, but now you're in the resale market and you're competing with new build, and we know how that goes, right? Sometimes you have to make an adjustment down some because it's not brand new and they can't pick everything out that they want. So similar, you know, similar types of neighborhoods with, you know, did you have a question?
No, I found that,
Yeah.
especially with the older neighborhoods, the ones that are Osherman built go higher than ones that are not. People will pay extra for that.
Right.
Because they're just, whether the perception of people who are from Frederick is that that is a better built house than a lot of the others.
Right.
And it may be true.
Well, and a lot of, that's when you're also going to look at lot size too, because a lot of your older communities that had that same builder, you had a bigger lot size, right? And that makes a huge difference as well. And landscaping and the maturity of the landscaping and all that good stuff, so. Adjustments. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns about adjustments? An issue that they may have had or that they need troubleshooted?
Lot size.
Lot size.
I mean, how much of a difference is there between 0.15 acre and a quarter acre? Or 1 acre and 2 acres? Because I know once you get past, say, 2 acres, it's like $7,000 an acre.
Right. Well, and there
But under
again,
that though,
and there again, that's when it's a great idea to go find those other properties and see what the difference is.
right.
So if you pull up your comps and you're looking at 1 acres and you have a comp that, and they're all 1 acres, right?
Well, that's easy.
So, yeah, but your property's on 2 acres.
Right.
So all your comps are same house, same bedroom, same bath, all of that, but you now have an extra acre. So then I would go also back outside of your community, you know, maybe outside of your comps, and figure it out that, okay, what's the difference that someone's willing to pay for 1 acre versus 2 acres in a completely different area, and then you can have a percentage. Basically, you don't want to be in a different county. It's got to be fairly similar. But that will give you a percentage of how much more that person's willing to pay for that extra acre. But you also need to be aware of what are they going to use it for, because if it's all wooded versus it's grass, I would make sure you're comparing apples to apples there too, and that you're pulling wooded lots versus grass lots, because people many times want more, they don't want as many woods, or vice versa. They want the privacy and they want more grass versus wood. So I know, Gary, you've had to do a lot of these big properties where, you know, you really have to figure out what's the difference in acreage. And when you start to talk about, you know, 40, 50, 100 acres, do you usually just grab the appraiser and kind of, for those larger properties, kind of see what they're
I do,
seeing?
I get Wayne to help me,
Mhm.
and he'll guide me in the right direction.
Right.
More acres doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna be 7,000 an acre. When you get up in those high acres,
Yeah.
then the price starts to come down. It's like you buy a can of Coke for $1, but you buy a 6-pack for about $4.
Right.
So that's kind of the way he explains it.
Right, and what are you gonna do with the land, what's the use, and all that good stuff. Solar panels being put on it might be a little different than using it for agricultural use, right? And of course, then you have to do the zoning and all that, and what's the adjustment on that. Speaking of solar panels, so, you know, what are you guys seeing? Price up or down if you have solar panels on the house?
Depends on if they're leased or number one.
Depends on how long they've been there.
I have one that just closed on. They had solar panels for 4 years. We own them. And it really didn't help the value for her. So,
But it didn't lower it? Didn't lower it, it was okay. If they're leased, I think you got a little bit more of an issue.
I
Andrea?
had one a little over a year ago that had owned solar panels, and Meyer at the closing table said that's why they were So I don't know how much that would make a difference, how much they would have offered if we didn't have it, but they said they were okay with that, like whatever the price was, even if that's, was a little high because they know it has solar panels.
Did you see a copy of your appraisal to see if the appraiser did?
See, I had one that the solar panels were 2 years old, they were leased, and we had 2 offers on the house, both asking, but one of them wanted the solar panels removed.
Right.
So that one, of course, they obviously didn't take that one because it would have cost them $18,000 to remove them. So, yeah,
Pay out the lease.
to buy out the lease, right, and have them removed.
We should have a company that would remove them. A lot of times they won't even remove them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Vivint that had put them up, but yeah. So it was, and that's one thing you really have to be careful of, is read that contract and find out what the process is, if they're leased to transfer.
So how would you guys look for that if you're trying to comp out your house that is leased? How are you gonna find that out if it's a lease versus
The lease, I
look
had
for your comps?
I had a thing with Wayne Six about 6 months ago. We had a property over in Carroll County, and the appraiser that did the appraiser was called in, didn't give a value for the solar panels that were owned. So I had a conversation with Wayne, and I pulled some, I did some research online and found a study that specifically mentioned our region and said specifically how much the percentage was. I think it was around 4% or so. And I sent that information over to Wayne. Wayne then came back and said, you know, thank you. And then we used that information with the appraiser, because of course the appraiser knew Wayne type of deal.
Right.
So we were able to gain that extra value because we were able to find that study. I'll see if I can find that study that I sent over. I'll send it over to you.
Okay, and that's for.
That's only on owned. For
owned
leased,
solar panels.
there really isn't, there doesn't seem to be much of a value for lease. You run
Right.
into the issue, which is the lease
Right.
itself.
Right, that somebody now has to pay an extra
Right.
payment for the lease of those things, so, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't come across what's the difference in, you know, the value of leased versus owned solar panels. So, you know, that would be one that you may have to do some digging up on, either from your own experience, or if you can find out, you know, hey, the solar panels and which was leased and which was owned, and what's our percentage, again, of the difference in price of leased versus owned.
Well, we had, not to interrupt, I had a contract where we ended up walking on it because it was gonna cost my client about $47,000 for removal of the panels and everything else going through that process after it was paid out.
Right,
So we lost that deal, ended up going to the subsequent, you know, he couldn't get away from solar panels. I don't know. I learned more about solar panels in a month and a half than I did. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it can be expensive.
yeah, it can be somewhat of a problem. So trying to figure out those adjustments, you know, try to, you know, do as much research as you can to see what's leased, what's owned, what was the difference in percentage that somebody's willing to pay for that. Kim?
Just unrelated, well, it is related somewhat to value, but I've also found that some of them, because of the way the house is oriented, aesthetically, they are very ugly. And I
Right.
think that
Yeah.
very much impacts whether or not the buyer is willing to even buy the house.
Right.
You know, the ones on the, when they're installed on the front, you know, the HOAs obviously accept them, but I think a lot of the aesthetics impact whether or not
Right,
it provides any value.
right, and then they obviously put them where they're most efficient.
Right.
So not always the most aesthetic, so, yeah. What about swimming pools? How much do you guys adjust for swimming pools? And I know they have that on your list,
That's from Florida.
so. But I will also tell you that it is, it depends on the neighborhood. You know, Ally and I were just having that conversation not too long ago. there's 21 homes in my little development, and 12 of them have pools. And I will just tell you, people were looking for pools, and when they move in there, they add pools in. So a pool in that particular neighborhood adds some value. Maybe not the whole amount of the value that you put into putting a pool in, but it does. Obviously, if you're in Florida or on the beach, a pool adds huge value. You wanna have that. But in other areas, the pool may not add any value because it's maintenance. It may take up the whole yard. I mean, I've seen some, that really does, the pool takes up the entire yard. So you really, again, have to know your neighborhood. Are you suburban? Are you rural? What's the lay of the land with the neighborhood and what the expectations are with that price home or that kind of development to see. And again, you can look at if you're in a different neighborhood, try to find similar neighborhoods that have pools, and you'll kind of know then the percentage again of what that value is and what people are willing to pay more for. Of the 21 homes in my neighborhood, I can tell you the ones that have pools sell for more. So you could easily do that percentage and say, well, how much more percentage-wise were people willing to pay for the pool versus not having a pool? Ally, I think you said your neighborhood has a lot of
We
people
have
have
a
pools.
lot of pools, and they're all around me. I was just kind of thinking in my mind, all the houses around me have them, but then there's a couple other streets that don't. I live right here, pool, 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 pool. I'm surrounded.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the summer, we have progressive pool parties, which get kind of fun. Hardscape actually comes into play as well. I've done really good
Great.
hardscape.
Great.
But I've noticed in the last couple of years, when I work with buyers, over half of them go, and I want a pool there when I get there, because I'm gonna get it for less than half that it's gonna cost me to put it in.
Absolutely.
So they're definitely marketable,
Right.
and by the way, we're talking in ground, not above,
Right.
so.
Right.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
But, I can tell you that I put way more in my pool than I will ever get out, but I
Sure.
don't care.
Right.
If I buy another home, another pool's going in. It's just the way. Summers are dry here,
Right.
so.
Gary, you were gonna make a statement on that?
Wayne always says if there's a community pool, that doesn't add a lot of value to your pool that's at your house.
Right.
It's a community.
It reduces it.
Yeah.
We have no community pool.
Yeah.
That's why we all have.
And again, I think that still may depend on the community. I can tell you for myself, I don't wanna go hang out with a bunch of kids at the community pool. I wanna have my own pool. But you're right, if there is, if there is a community pool for the kids to go to and they just pay the fee for that, then yeah, they can all go hang out with their friends.
I've also been told that saltwater is really what people are looking for. So if you think about putting a pool in, make sure you put that little salt generator in. Because it's deemed to be better for the environment and your skin. It's only $1,000, so you'll get it back.
And that I don't know. There's different theories on that.
Yes,
as
there
well.
are.
Because salt can also tear up your concrete pretty quickly, so.
It can.
Yeah. So I've heard different views on that, so. Okay, so let's sit down. I've got two properties in your packet. Let me find my glasses here. Two properties in your packet, and we're gonna kind of go through together. This isn't gonna be just me doing this. Go through both Bright MLS and NER RPR. How many of you all use Bright versus NER or RPR, or what are you using to do your CMAs? Mike?
Used to use MRIS more, but, I use a mixture of both, I guess, actually, yeah. A little bit of both.
Both?
Is anyone using Toolkit?
Yeah, we got pulls from the MLS. The CMA toolkit is pulling from Bright, so if you're using CMA toolkit, yeah, it puts it in a nice format and a nice report for you, but it's still pulling from Bright MLS versus RPR. Kim, you mainly use?
I mostly use Bright, but then I usually download data and do spreadsheets as well, kind
That's
of do
smart.
my own thing.
Exactly. I just did
That's
comps.
just it. I think that's, part of it is doing a good CMA, especially if it's a unique property, really, you can't always just go by your comps that are in Bright or anywhere. You can start there, but then you gotta figure out all those other adjustments. So when you do an adjustment, so let me just do that real quick though. When you do an adjustment, so if you have a house that's $350, and we're trying to get our subject properties to be as close as our subject, right? Our comps to be as close as our subject. So we have our subject, which is question mark. We don't know what it is. And then one of your comps is 350, one's 355, and you got one that's, we'll say 380. So when we start to do our adjustments, we're gonna look at our subject property and say this house at 350 did not have a gourmet kitchen. Nothing's been updated, right? So if your 350 house hasn't been updated, and you maybe go on RPR or you look up some data, how much did they pay for the kitchen? You're not gonna necessarily get 100% back, but do your adjustment. We need to add the kitchen on here, right? So say they spent $15,000. Your subject property has a $15,000 kitchen that this one did not have, right? So then over here, we have this one that sold for $355, and maybe this one has that extra bathroom that yours doesn't, right? So maybe we looked at some other comparables and we figured that bathroom was $8,000. Yours doesn't have it, so we need to minus the $8,000 off. Is that making sense? Because I know people get confused on this a lot of times when you start to do adjustments. They're thinking backward. And then say your 380 house has, maybe it does have a pool, maybe it has an extra sunroom, bump out, a little more space on it, and yours does not have that. And you figure all that stuff out, and that's worth 40,000, right? So you need to minus 40,000 off of here because your subject property doesn't have that. So here we have 340 would be the comp for that. 8,000. Why didn't I make myself easy, my life easy? 55 minus 8. What's that?
47.
347. And then you're going to add 15 on this one because you've added a $15,000 kitchen.
365.
365, sorry. See, this is why I'm not the math professor. So now, this is how your kind of comps have come out, right? So now you've got a whole different, you want to try to get these adjustments to get it to be as similar as your property, right? And again, I'm just making up numbers here for stuff, but.
Now, I always also subtract out seller subsidy to try to get like a net sales price. Because if you just pull what it closed for, it doesn't take into account whether or not they provided some type of credit, and some of those credits are substantial.
Except that an appraiser, well, first of all, you need to look at the overall, all the sales. If every single one of your sales had seller subsidy, then that's you're comping out. So you don't have to worry. I would put it on their net sheet to say, hey, every single sale in this neighborhood has had seller subsidy. So let's put that on your net sheet because you're probably gonna get asked for that. But an appraiser still does the value on the home, and I get it. They may look at credits, and I think that's important again on the net sheet. But the value of the home is